right. Well, welcome everybody. Thank you so much for joining us today. I am happy to report that it's still summer in Manlius. And so we're especially happy to have you with us today. The focus of today's session is our natural environment. And we thought that it would be the best place to start with comprehensive planning is those parts that we do not have control over. The land is the land, and we have to work around it. So we thought this would be a good sort of foundational topic. And then we do have two other topics planned. One is on the history of the area, and the third one is on business and commerce in town of Manlius. So those are our three listening sessions. We do welcome your input, and we will be communicating with you via email in between to get your ideas and input so that you may be able to participate in other kinds of work groups that we may form during 2021 that might be more specific to your particular interests. But this first set of listening sessions are designed to be sort of generic and just kind of giving everybody a baseline of where we're at. Today we are very honored to have two guests with us. Doug Miller is an engineer for the town of Manlius, and he has many letters after his name. And he is particularly knowledgeable in the area of stormwater and water management issues. And then Neil Murphy is the emeritus president of ESF, School of Environmental Science and Forestry. And he has also an engineer, and also has many letters after his name. And we really appreciate them taking some time out this afternoon to support us in learning about our environment and maybe how we can nurture our environment better and help it sustain us while we sustain it. So that's what we're hoping for. And we also are ably assisted by Allison Weber on the share screen. So welcome to everybody for coming today. And for those of you that are listening at another time, thank you for taking the time to join us.
Sarah, do you mind introducing yourself as in your role? And also, I think John is online too and listening in.
So I'm sorry, I didn't introduce myself, but my name is on the little thing there. I'm Sarah Bollinger. I'm a town councilor. Heather Waters is also a town councilor. And on the line with us as an attendee is John Deere, also a town councilor. Doug, are you guys ready to pick up?
Yep. Thanks, Sarah. I'm excited to be here today to talk about some of the natural attributes in the town of Manlius. You know, over the last probably decade and a half, I think we've made some great strides in the town, but I think in looking at my notes here, the things that really have kicked in for the town of Manlius for taking a better approach to the natural attributes of the community were the State Environmental Quality Review Act, which was implemented by New York State in 1978. That act was revised in June of '87, and if we look back through the history of Manlius, it's quite evident that that first revision in '87 really changed the way that things were done in Manlius for the last 30 to 35 years. Prior to that, there was an appreciation for the environment, but not as formally as what we take into account these days. And I'm going to ask Allison to pull up one of the tools that we use on a day-to-day basis within the town to take into account all of our natural attributes.
GIS is still not cooperating, but I'm working on it behind the scenes.
Okay. So, you know, some of the things that we take into account on a continuing basis throughout the town are streams, lakes, geotechnical attributes, ag districts, steep slopes, and we do have critical impact areas. So, you know, the town, from an environmental standpoint, from south to north drastically changes. We have some unique characteristics in all different corners of the town. On the north end of town, activities are dominated by the encroachment of the Cicero Swamp and the convergence of three of the major streams that constitute the watersheds of Oneida Lake. So Allie, if you were to click on floodplains, DEC wetlands, and federal wetlands, I think that's going to tell a story with a lot of our water activities. So the town has physically two watersheds, two lakes that the water flows to. So the majority, probably 95% of the town flows to Oneida Lake. If you're looking at the map, the farthest left-hand quadrant of the map around which abuts Cicero and DeWitt, that is the headwork area of Lay Creek, and that watershed flows to Onondaga Lake. And that quadrant of the town, we strictly adhere to TMDLs, maximum loads on that stream for nitrogen and phosphorus. Just a little FYI, in that area of Lake Creek, the pitch or the fall from the town of Manlius to Onondaga Lake is somewhere in the range of 10 feet plus or minus. So along that area, there is little hydraulic gradient. And that is the same for everything north of Manoa. Even our streams that flow to Oneida Lake, Butternut and Limestone at those two locations where they converge with Chittenango, right on the town of Sullivan and Cicero line, have very little gradient. And you can see by looking at this map that the village of Manoa is inundated by not only floodplain areas, but both federal and DEC wetlands. So when we look at projects in this area of the town, it's always a critical component to look at the way that those meandering brooks work in that area. And the characteristics of those streams change. They change from the headworks of both Limestone and Butternut. Now the headworks of Butternut are not in the town of Manlius. However, the headworks of Limestone Creek, both the eastern branch and the western branch, and Bishop's Brook, do start in and around the southern edge of the town of Manlius. And within that area, just like Sarah and I were talking earlier, what compounds some of the issues we have on the south end of town is through upstate New York, in Onondaga County. It starts in the town of Onondaga. It comes through town of DeWitt, through Clark's Reservation, through the Jamesville Quarry, through the Kinsella Quarry. There's an escarpment of limestone deposits in this area, often referred to as karst topography. And I think some of, when we look at projects on this end of the town, that escarpment area, which is basically right around the Route 5 area, bisecting our town, everything south of there, for a general rule of thumb, the escarpment area is in that area. In that area we see limestone mining traditionally, but what you also find is in the areas that are not mined are the significant characteristics of the karst topography. So, some of you may be aware, there's a popular area right now along Sweet Road and 173 that has just been opened up as part of a land trust area in the town. That area, areas contingent to that, have been designated as a critical environmental area by the town of Manlius. And some of the characteristics you see there are the same characteristics that you see at Clark's Reservation. You'll see sinkholes, you'll see streams like the referenced as the Three Falls Woods, that during certain times of the year, the water magically goes into the karst topography and then shows up, to the best of our knowledge, down gradient somewhere in the Limestone Creek area. And that is a very naturally occurring area in that part of the town. So when we look at projects in that part of the town, we are always looking with an eye towards the effects and impacts to karst topography on the naturally occurring areas. There are some areas where we've been further east where there isn't as much development, where we see sinkholes developing. Some of them look like the dark side of the moon. Some of the craters open up to an effect of 20 to 30 feet in circumference. When we find these areas, not only do we work with our geologists in the area, but we also work with the local mining companies. And Tom Kinsella is always a great asset when we come across these type of scenarios. And he has firsthand experience within his quarry of how karst topography works in and around those areas. While we're on the topic of mining, if you can think about it, the gradient from the south end of town into the north end drops off just behind the village of Fayetteville. And if you're a fisherman, those areas upstream of there are the areas where we have more of a hydraulic gradient. Therefore, we have some colder water due to the natural shading of that area. We also have more oxygen in that area. Those are the areas that are some of the prime fishing areas in New York State for trout. As we morph into the Fayetteville area, just north of the Route 5 area, this is what Sarah and I were talking earlier. The topography changes, the gradient flattens out. We still have some of those species of trout in that area, but they kind of change from a cutthroat variety or a rainbow trout to a brown trout or to panfish. We also see in that area of Fayetteville, if you're familiar with that area, along that area just below the escarpment, the limestone changes into an alluvial fill. So Erie Village, what we refer to as the Fietta property across from the car dealerships in Manlius. As you go into Manoa, just to the east, gravel beds over there. Off Fremont Road, the Santero properties, traditionally, they have mined gravels in that area. So, things start to change as we get into that arena. Another interesting fact that I've shared with the group as we prepped for this this discussion is, naturally occurring from the south, from Pompey with the Limestone Creek and in Manlius with Bishop's Brook, and even to a certain extent, but not as dominating from Butternut Creek. But we also have New York State DEC approved topsoil mining in the town of Manlius. And that is at Action Topsoil, and I believe the Raimondos also have a permit. So as we leave Fayetteville and we approach that area that's impacted by the Cicero Swamp, if you think about it, right? If you look at Pompey Center after a rainstorm at that dam there, the water will be coming off looking like chocolate milk. Some of that's naturally occurring. We have new regulations upstream to try to limit that, but that naturally occurring phenomena and the retention times of the settleable solids, per se, in the stream tend to settle out near the Raimondo and the Action topsoil sites, and the stream turns into a meandering brook where they have pockets that they mine the sediments in that area. And these are all things that, you know, when we look at projects, when we look at development, when you do comprehensive planning, these are the type of things that come into play of, you know, what can we do in Manlius? How can we do it? How can we do it in step with our naturally occurring environments? You know, along those same lines, you have the two lakes at Green Lakes that I'm sure Dr. Murphy could talk better about than I. But you know, those are very indicative of that escarpment area along that latitude in the town. We also, because of the naturally occurring characteristics of the town, predominantly on the south end of town, closer to the village of Manlius along Limestone Creek, there is a concern with steep slopes. And those steep slopes generally occur where the streams have carved out the natural waterways and have developed very steep areas. So we have areas of concern predominantly along the eastern branch of Limestone, but then also at the convergence of the eastern branch and western branch, which happens behind the Stickley factory. When we get back down towards Fayetteville, we have some steep slopes in that vicinity also, where we have had structural problems prior to some of the appreciation of some of these areas. We've had issues along Bluffview, and then the apartments just off of High Bridge, where a building many years ago had to be moved. Allie, if you click off these areas and you were to click on ag districts, I think that tells another story in the town. There you go. So if you look at the ag districts in the town, you know, they're dominated on that eastern side of the town again. You've got some large parcels in there. You've got, you know, the Mulvaney farm. You guys see, you know, you had the Gates farm there. Right now you have Aspinall's tree farm. You also have the Hafner tree farm. But those areas have been dominated on the eastern area, and I believe partially because our you know, our 20th and 21st century population centers and the infrastructure that follows those really haven't been pushed out to those areas as of yet. And, you know, we see some of those areas now changing into non-traditional farming. You know, we have some horse farms, some large horse farms in those areas. We have some hop farming in those areas. And we still have some dairy. We have horticulture with, I guess, silviculture, with the Aspinalls having a couple of large parcels, both on the north area of town and then on the south area of town, just off of Hatfield Road. The next map I wanted to show, and this kind of gives you an idea of what we have going on in the town. I guess we could look at parklands. And this was interesting to me. If you zoom out just a little bit on the left, Allie, the town of Manlius itself doesn't have a town-owned park. But if you look at this map of Onondaga County, And you can zoom in and you can zoom out. I mean, Manlius is dominated by Green Lakes and the Erie Canal parks. The other towns, you know, in Cicero, there's a large swath of park, but I believe that's dominated by the Cicero Swamp. And I believe in Clay, that's the Great Bear Swamp. And now if you zoom back in on Manlius Alley, I think you'll see that there's, within each village, there are significant parks. And then in the town of Manlius, Green Lakes is a huge park right in the middle. And this is also interesting because, you know, traditionally we've seen in the last 30 years, most of the development has been in either the Fayetteville or the Manlius area. And then if we take this map down and we were to click on the sewer map, Allie, that even though that's a man-made condition, that kind of tells us when we look at projects that those are the areas for several reasons where development usually occurs in the town. And it's predicated upon some of the things we touched on before: wetlands, floodplains, karst topography, depth to rock, which goes hand in hand with the karst topography, and the ag districts. So, you know, when we take a step back and you think about it, anything north of the rail yards, if you scroll back down, we have no sewers. So that whole north end of town, because of the type of soils we have, they don't perk well. If you overlay that floodplains map again, Allie, you have no sewers. Your floodplain dominates the area. And probably if you click on the two wetlands again, there's very little land that is openly developable in the north end of town. Likewise, when we get down to the south end of town, traditionally, you know, when people come in, and we've had developers from time to time, deep-pocketed developers, good developers, come in and look at this end of the town. We don't map our public water because of security reasons, but the water map does not necessarily parallel the sewer. But what issues we've had with development on the south end of town now becomes the rock issue, the steep slopes, which basically follow the Bishop Brook area and the eastern branch of limestone. The cost to develop in the high rock areas. And then if you look, generally speaking, the Onondaga County Sewer District mirrors the sewer map that you're looking at. Now, some of the lines are a little bit different. They square off. The DFM road area is in the district, but it's very difficult and very costly to sewer that area. There you go, right? So if you look here, you know, one of the key components when we think about comprehensive planning, an area that would be prime for development would be the opposite road of Mallard's Landing in the southeast corner of the town. And in fact, there are a couple 100-acre parcels just across that road that would be prime areas for prime development in a comprehensive plan. You know, that's an area that should be taken into consideration. When you talk, when you keep your ear close to the ground and you listen to the developers in the town of Manlius, right now, there are not very many parcels that are conducive to traditional development for our community. There have been people who have taken looks at, properties, things like next to the FM high school, there's a large parcel that was used for quarrying. There's a cell tower in there now. That parcel runs along Do Good Road. It's a large parcel, but once again, if you're familiar with the area, it's impacted heavily by karst topography. And what you'll see in that area is the Bishop Brook tributaries. On a normal day like today, they may not even be running, but when was that? In July, we had 4.5 inches of rain within an hour, and Pride Lane area, the Mormon Church, the culverts going across Do Good Road, the culverts going across North Eagle Village. If you haven't witnessed it, next time it rains heavy like that, take a look, because those areas are heavily impacted. Those brooks will swell from being 2 feet across to 50 to 75 feet across. And those are things that we take into account with all the natural attributes that we have off these tools that I just showed you, and others that are at our exposure. And when developers come in, those are the type of things that we share with them. I think that's it. If anybody had anything else they wanted me to look at this time, I could probably go on for hours at a time. Once, when we started talking about this and I started delving into it, these are the type of things that myself and the highway superintendent and, people like Sarah and Heather are now, really engaged in. The other thing from a comprehensive plan standpoint, the one thing that we see now, with the last round of stormwater upgrades that we saw, and they're continuing to morph, and I've been in touch with the DEC on those, and possibly next year there'll be some more changes to the stormwater regs. But we look at nitrogen and phosphorus levels, and like I mentioned, there's a TMDL for Onondaga Lake. It's only a matter of time before we get that same TMDL or a similar TMDL for Oneida Lake. And we're going to have to start working with Butternut and Chittenango and Limestone and those tributaries to upgrade the effort. It's a maximum daily load for basically nitrogen and phosphorus in the stream. So they will, scientists are currently looking at Oneida Lake, just like they did Onondaga Lake, to see what the impacts. So if you think about it, and Neil can talk to this better than I am because he's the chemist. When you hear Oneida Lake reports that there are bacterial issues at the beaches in Oneida Lake, that's basically because the tribs are feeding in nutrients to the lake that stress the lake. That lake is a very shallow lake. It's very similar to Onondaga. So the aeration that comes through that lake doesn't help the situation. So, in due time, we are going to see restrictions on the streams going through Manlius. And everybody else will have the same too, right? From the North Shore, from the South Shore. I would say that, we are probably in good shape to meet those goals and objectives just because of the demographics of our community. So
what would be sources of nitrogen and phosphorus that we could maybe be being aware of?
When we fertilize our lawns, we want to make sure that we have the proper uptake. We don't want to have excess fertilizer on our lawns. Some simple things like car washing, not necessarily washing your own car in your driveway, going to a car wash that treats and regulates the water. Pet waste. Some of them are pretty small. Some of them are things that I think a lot of us are already doing. When we currently permit any subdivisions these days, there is a water quality component of that. So we'll have a pool in front of the retention pond. We also may have in some of our projects bioretention areas to impact the water quality. So those are some of the things that are inherent to development as we move forward. Now, with the stormwater regs changing, it becomes most of our projects that we see, because of those regulations, most projects are done using cluster development, which increases green space and allows better use of the land and taking the natural attributes of the land into play. For instance, we have communities that we've talked about here where, back in the 70s, there are roads that have stream names. Those were streams and they were piped. Today, we would not allow that. We would ask to take the natural attributes of that stream, create buffers off the side of the streams. And not only that, we would ask to do cluster development where we could get more green space, possibly smaller lots, so a developer gets the same amount of development, but he impacts less land, right? He has less roads, he has less pipes, he has less underground pipes, and it really turns out to be a nicer development. That being said, the exercise we just went through, there is not a lot of land to be developed in the town of Manlius. I believe last year, we were in the range of 20 to 30 building permits for new starts of homes. Mm-hmm. And those are traditionally in some of the subdivisions that were already approved. Now, that cuts a couple different ways. People like to have newer homes. People like to have, a 4-bedroom home. Some people like to have smaller homes. So a lot of our building activity is in remodeling of homes these days. But that's not to say that if there were a pent-up demand, then we would have to take into account.
Right. So Doug, that's actually a good segue, because you're talking about what are the things that we can do, and cluster development is an example of that. I'd like to invite Neil Murphy to talk a little bit about the bigger picture, and then he's got some examples of other communities who have done a good job with their comprehensive planning, and that we could learn from that too.
Sarah, thank you. One of the things I'd like to share with everybody on the Zoom meeting is a little bit about the COVID-19 pandemic and what we've learned from that pandemic, particularly as it relates to the environment. It's been a terrible event. Loss of life. We've had the loss of financial security, loss of jobs. Our youth are struggling as we speak with their development and education. But if we look hard, we do find some positive news. We have found a lot more about the heroic and tireless healthcare workers and the thousands of volunteers that make the lives of those that have suffered the most more bearable. But if we also dig a little bit deeper, we can analyze and understand the impact of the COVID pandemic on our global environment. And in many respects, a lot of environmentalists seem to think that the pandemic, relative to our learning about the environment, basically was a blessing in disguise. Now, some researchers from the University of Sydney, in particular Dr. Malik, has framed the current picture very well. We're all experiencing the worst economic shock since the Great Depression, while at the same time we have experienced the greatest drop in greenhouse gas emissions since the burning of fossil fuels began.
Wow.
And I think that's really significant. The University of Sydney study has actually determined that the global greenhouse gases during the pandemic has declined by what is referred to as 2.5 gigatons. And a gigaton is basically 1 billion tons of greenhouse gases. And if we look at that, for example, to our global financial crisis in 2009, we had about a little less than 0.5 gigaton reduction. And just following the Kyoto Protocol implementation in 1998, as a result of land use charge changes, it was reduced by in the order of 2 gigaton. So this 2.5 gigaton reduction in greenhouse gases is larger than any drop in greenhouse gases in human history. As a matter of fact, if we take a look at China, as a result of their lockdowns and as a result of their different pandemic control measures, there's been a 25% reduction in carbon dioxide emissions and a 50% reduction in nitrogen dioxide emissions, resulting in cleaner and healthier air to breathe. Now, what are some of the more visible manifestations of this? In Venice, for example, the canals in Venice are cleaner. They have much better clarity. You can actually see the bottom of the canals today. If you look, for example, in the fish biomass in the European waters, that biomass has increased dramatically, largely because the fishing fleets have not been able to get out of port. Sea turtles have been found laying eggs on beaches that they never populated before. And particularly impactful to me is a surprise gift to the residents of Punjab, India. Because for the very first time in almost 30 years, the decline in air emissions have allowed them to see the Himalaya mountains. There are some very interesting things. Now, we've been studying those as scientists and engineers in greater depth in the US. Dr. Kaiser, Jennifer Kaiser from Georgia Tech, too bad Georgia Tech got beat the way they had gotten beaten yesterday. The Rambling Wreck got wrecked yesterday. But Jennifer and her colleagues are looking at the impact of the COVID-19 travel bans and the reductions, for example, in air quality around airports. And why are scientists looking at it? Because it would give us some insights as to what the future might be when we have maybe all electric vehicles and when we have more efficient airplanes. In general, those scientists are finding better air quality and less traffic. Nitrogen dioxide is released in the atmosphere whenever we burn a fuel, whether we're burning a fuel in a car, an airplane, whatever. And that nitrogen dioxide reacts with other chemicals in the atmosphere to produce ozone. Airplane exhaust also produces unique chemical residues, including formaldehyde, another toxin. And basically, studies around BWI Airport and the Atlanta Hartsfield-Jackson Airport have found that with the air traffic being down 60 to 70%, the spectrometers that are both on the ground and in satellites have found these three contaminants to be reduced very sharply. These findings were also supported by the use of data from the Aurora satellite. And the Aurora satellite takes a global picture. And basically that Aurora satellite, when it passes over China, for example, it shows a very sharp decline in nitrogen dioxide. This is likely the result of less coal being burned to produce electric power. But let's look at the other side. COVID-19 pandemic has also had some negative impacts on the environment. These negative impacts have to be better understood by the scientists. The pandemic has resulted in cover for illegal activities affecting the environment, including deforestation, for example, in the rainforests of Brazil, an increase in deforestation by about 50% during the pandemic. Poaching in Africa of endangered species, endangered animals, leading to a loss of biodiversity. And the economic fallout from the pandemic may also be affecting our investment in green infrastructure. Now, when we cut our forests down for short-term gain, when humans tend to come into greater contact with wild animals, at the same time, when we're poaching endangered animals, literally, we're poaching potential carriers of unique infectious viruses. And the CDC has suggested that 3 out of 4 infectious diseases comes from animals. So what can we do through environmental management to change the picture? Literally, if we could provide financial incentives, for example, in the range of about $10 billion a year that would protect our forests in our rainforests, it would sharply reduce deforestation and reduce by 40% these risk areas where viruses tend to be fostered. In China, for example, wildlife farming, approximately a $20 billion industry. If we could find another way that those people can make a living and support their families, and we think that maybe $20 billion may be sufficient to do that, we again would reduce the potential for a future pandemic. So there is a positive thing about the impact of the pandemic on our environment, and there also is a negative thing. But one of the things that this pandemic has caused is to have countries look to say, what can we do to get out of the economic malaise and out of the problems produced by the pandemic? South Korea has promised a $10 billion new Green Deal that will have its tremendous impact on climate, the release of climate change causing substances. Rwanda, this is a country that has a GDP of approximately $11 billion, are committing $9 billion to a new green infrastructure. And we also see the IMF has said that they're going to use their $1 trillion lending capacity to make climate resilience a key factor for lending in the future. 50 some odd developing countries have really made some extraordinary commitments based on basically what we've seen through the pandemic. And basically even China, committing in the order of $1.4 trillion for new electric vehicle charging stations, high-speed rail. Where is the US in the picture? I can tell you well behind. Now, we have a great opportunity to help nature repair and nurture our planet. We can't allow this opportunity to pass us by. I'm reminded of 2 quotes. Look deep into nature and then you will understand everything better. You could never guess who made that, whose quote that is from. Albert Einstein, one of our best mathematicians and physicists known to mankind. The other is nature. Nothing exists alone. And that was from Rachel Carson. So we do have a lot to learn, and the pandemic has been very difficult. But we have to realize too that we have 107,000 Americans every year die from basically pulmonary, various type of respiratory diseases because of air pollution. That picture has to change. Globally, 2.5 million people die every year because of disease transmitted by contaminated water. As Jesslyn Worland had suggested in his article called The Defining Year for the Planet, he suggests we have one last chance. In the future, we may look at 2020 as a year we decided to keep we've decided not to keep driving off the climate cliff, but rather to take the last exit. And we've got to do it. We in the Northeast have seen about a 1.5 degrees C increase in temperature, largely because those 70 or 80 days were 21, 22, 23 days when consecutive days, temperatures above 80 degrees at all. But to get to where we need to be, we've got to reduce basically our discharge of CO2 emissions by 7.6%. This year, because of the pandemic, we're about 7%. So we have learned a lot, but we've got a lot more to learn. Talking about sustainability practices, let's review, first of all, what we mean when we talk about sustainability. The one I like, because it's the simplest one, is take only what you need and provide the rest for future generations. It absolutely describes why we have a humanistic and social responsibility to develop sustainability plans. Another one is the quality of not being harmful to the environment or depleting natural resources, and thereby supporting long-term ecological balance. Again, another good definition of a sustainability plan. Now, EPA has a very long definition for a sustainability plan, and given where we are, I'm not going to get into that. But the big thing that they have defined is that it should develop and describe a future dealing with social, economic, environmental, and other requirements for both the present generation and the future generation. Sustainability is very important to make sure we have and we continue to have the water, materials, and resources to protect human health and the environment. And most importantly, we have to protect it for our children and grandchildren. Sarah mentioned two municipal sustainability plans that I had reviewed in preparation for today. One is for the city of Avondale, just outside of Phoenix. And they have a very unique vision statement. And the vision statement is, our organization operates in an environmentally honest and innovative manner that protects the earth and serves the generations to come. I think that's very effective. And their plan includes sustainability impact areas, 11 sustainability impact areas, with both short-term commitments, middle-term commitments, and long-term structural changes in order to achieve their sustainability objectives. They cover things like community engagement, transportation, procurement, materials, and waste. Land use, Doug has reviewed very well with you the land use issues for the town. Buildings and maintenance, it's a big deal. Health and well-being of the community. Ecosystems. We know we have a healthy community when we have healthy ecosystems. Energy and climate, our water resources, air quality. One of the things that the scientists have found is an urban forest can have a substantial impact on improving air quality and reducing respiratory diseases. It's amazing with a very small stoma on a leaf, what that stoma can do in terms of drawing in air pollutants. And so talking about how we can make our village green, figuratively green, I think is very important. City of Avondale developed 34 strategies, 9 identified actions, and 6 identified targets. They definitely concluded that sustainability involve cross-cutting strategic concepts that connects all areas of planning and design. It represents values that need to be shared with everybody in the community. It's a framework going forward for efficient planning, management, and even more importantly, collaboration. And it represents an opportunity to make some very, very positive contributions. Now, the second is the sustainability plan for the city of Flagstaff, Arizona. They put a much greater emphasis on their employees and how, for example, they could foster a safe and health work environment. Their responsibility to provide opportunities for continuing education of their employees. Learning, also employee recognition, and increasing employee health and safety. Also, of course, in any sustainability plan, increasing energy efficiency in energy performance of municipal buildings. I'm sitting as we are talking today, this afternoon, in a building that is a LEED certified building. And the environment inside this building is to die for. Now, also optimal energy performance of all occupied municipal facilities. Increasing accountability of the employees for municipal energy use and concurrently reducing greenhouse gas emissions. Increasing renewable energy generation. Today, it's great to have, for example, a solar field, for example, on a landfill. But we have the ability today to integrate solar into our buildings. Our windows, we have the ability to have those panes be solar collectors. And so looking at the innovation that's available, I think is also, as in the case of Flagstaff, they found was very important. Looking at purchasing, sustainable purchasing practices, reducing municipal water consumption. Now, if you're in Arizona, water is precious. It should be precious where we are also, but we have fortunately sufficient water to cover all of our needs. And one of the interesting things they also include in their sustainability plan is resiliency and preparedness. And we've seen too many cities, too many villages, too many towns that haven't incorporated sufficient resiliency for the future challenges that may be provided by our climate. And as with Avondale, actions and goals are presented as short-term, mid-term, and long-term. One very last piece. What are some of the advantages and benefits of sustainability planning? Incorporating solar and wind energy, all forms of renewable energy, it simply reduces energy costs. At a minimum, it's in the range of 10 to 20%, depending upon who's doing the financing. Implementing strategies such as recycling and reducing consumption can substantially reduce supply costs. Sustainability supports the well-being of individuals and communities. That's frequently something that is overlooked as a benefit, for example, of sustainability plans. Promotes better economy. It also promotes the reduction of waste and all forms of pollution and maintains the enhancement of the environment, water and all of our natural resources. It fundamentally provides for a better community for our children and our grandchildren. I think I'm pretty much on target in terms of time, but
You are, but we have flexibility. So if you
Okay.
have another point you want to make, please feel free.
No, I think that's sufficient for today, but if people have questions, I'd love to try and answer.
Yeah, I would love to engage the people who are here. I also I have one question for you to sort of kick us off. And I just recently heard that in the wildfires in the West, which is, I think, another air hazard that we're dealing with now, that one of the factors was a beetle eating the trees. And so the trees were already vulnerable and they burned quicker and easier because of that. And I know we have some invasive beetles from time to time here. And I'm just wondering if there's a climate change aspect to sort of insect life, or if that's a separate trajectory, if there's something else we should be thinking about with that.
I think any state that has large public forests are threatened. Those forests are threatened by invasive species. The woolly algae hemlock, for example, is attacking the hemlocks and has attacked the hemlocks in the watershed of Skinny Atlas Lake. And that being a partial contributor toward the harmful algal blooms. We have now the oak blight that's affecting oak trees. So all those forest pests are tending to move from the south to the north because of climate change, the warmer temperatures. I mean, even ticks, we're seeing a fantastic increase in the density of ticks, mainly because of the change of our climate. So that is a big issue as it relates to the health of our forests.
Thank you for that. There was a comment.
By the way, my colleagues here that are foresters would have felt good that I was talking about their area of expertise.
Okay, well, we want to cheer them on. Steve asks, this might be a Doug question also. Does this indicate that the greatest developed potential in the town is actually redevelopment of previously developed parcels, which I think is sort of the definition of smart growth? So I think that Steve may be interested in both of your comments on that topic.
Doug?
I saw that. Go ahead, Neil.
No, please, you.
No, I think, Steve, you're spot on. I think because of all the restrictions within the town, I think right from not only a sustainability standpoint, but from an economic standpoint, I think it makes it more attractive to take some of the properties inside the village and redevelop those. And I think that's probably where we want to go with some of this comprehensive planning, is make that more attractive for several reasons to redevelop inside the existing footprint. And it's probably going to be cheaper long run. You're going to have walkability to shops. You're going to be able to bike, instead of getting outside that footprint where the quality of life might not be quite as nice. So I think you're spot on, and I think as we move forward with comprehensive planning, I think we should take an eye towards that to make that a higher incentive to get inside those areas, right? I mean, you're going to reduce your carbon footprint, all the reasons that Neil was just talking about. It makes a lot of sense. Mixed use planning, right? I mean, inside those villages, I think that's another thing, right? I mean, we see that in several communities we're working in right now. That, even from a development standpoint, a developer can come in and have a commercial on the bottom and residential on the top. That's traditionally you see that mostly in villages, but there's no reason in certain arenas that we couldn't do that in the town too, but driving it back into where we're already impacted our area.
Neil,
Town center is a good example.
can you talk a little bit about the smart growth concept, Neil?
Yeah, in essence, what Doug is really talking about is smart growth in his response to that question. It's really using the infrastructure that we've already paid for and optimizing that infrastructure for future growth. It's going about the project, for example, minimizing the materials that are required for a development project. And again, it's to create in smart growth a highly productive environment that optimizes productivity and human health. Certainly the recycling.
You don't always hear about productivity and human health in the same sentence, but maybe that's how we should be thinking.
Oh, absolutely.
Absolutely.
If you do not have a healthy environment, you cannot have a highly productive society. I was just reminded before I joined you, one thing, for example, the fires on the West Coast, one of the things they produce are what are called PM 2.5s, particulate matter less than 2.5 microns in diameter. They're actually saying that because of those fires, the smoke created by the fires, that kind of thing, and the resulting PM 2.5s, that may exacerbate COVID-19 issues because it creates inflammation by those particulate materials within the vascular system that just makes that system much more ripe to infection. That's an example that here we have an environmental condition that people are trying to live in that is definitely adverse to their health, adverse to productivity.
And when I was in New York City for 9/11, and even though I lived on the Upper East Side, and I worked on the upper West Side, we had, of course, because of the disaster site, the plumes of smoke, and the air quality was affected even there for weeks. So I can only imagine, and of course it's very logical to understand sort of the health impacts that happen for people who are working and living near the disaster site. But so it's the only experience I've ever had to help me understand a little bit, or to frame what would be happening for people living in neighborhoods that are within, that are close to the fire sites. And when you look at the fire map on Google, if you go and just Google for the fires, they are everywhere.
Yeah.
And so it's really remarkable. The tick piece that you mentioned too is really, really, I mean, we think about the practical entry points for people in the community to kind of start thinking about this planning and this idea of planning and health in our environment in order to live for the time being, and also to promote the kind of environment they want their kids to enjoy when they're grown. The GIS picture that you showed, Allison, and when Allison was here, and Doug, I mean, I know how important Green Lakes is to me, to my family, and to one of the reasons that I chose to live here and to come back home here. But seeing the image of it be so large and in the center of our town the way that it is inspiring to think about how we can talk about this plan and how lucky we are. I mean, I saw Baldwinsville and I saw sort of Beaver Lake, I think, over there, but so as a county park. And of course we share with the state of New York this wonderful park, but that idea of interdependence and how what an asset we have right here, and understanding, and the thing you learn right when you become a town councilor and start talking to Doug is it's all about the rocks and the water.
Well, and Heather, I think the other thing that Neil kind of touched on, and some of the things that bring it home to our community, back in July when we had the big rain event, you can say whatever you want, but we're seeing more sporadic and more intense rainfall, and the event that we saw in Manlius, and when I had reach out with some of the people that were impacted, it's pretty evident to me, even without scientific data, that these events are becoming more frequent, more sporadic, and more intense. So we see that hits home. We also see when Neil touched on climate change potential with the ticks. We see our residents more concerned about that, evidenced by there are more, inherently there are more ticks impacting our residents. So, when we think about it, the things Neil touched on, there are some things that really, really hit home to things that we have going on right in our own backyards, right? That we can show people, whether it's an emerald ash borer or, the ticks or the intense rain. There are things that we can, share with our constituents and try to make an impact on these issues moving forward.
Absolutely. I mean, I think it's almost the reverse of NIMBY, not in my backyard, but in my backyard, is a way for us to think about it. We have two sort of questions and some feedback from Nancy Smith. She agrees with Dr. Murphy on the importance of laying out a planning principle, environmental protection, smart growth, age-friendly and across all ages, engagement, newer health policies. And the county is kicking off its livability planning initiative with the intent of engaging towns and villages countywide. The focus is on policy change and it encompasses all of the above. The project is being managed by Focus Greater Syracuse. I think this is a great example. And the next question I'll just read now because it sort of relates. From Don Gates, will this comprehensive plan for the town include the 3 villages? Will they share the goals of the plan? How does that work? I want to say that I think we are very intent on doing a few things and know that this is sort of a given for us. We do not want to do anything in a vacuum. We want to make use of the resources we have, which include SUNY ESF and Syracuse and all the higher educational institutions, and the fact that Cornell and the cooperative extension opportunities are there and so much research is available to us. We also have to think about the fact that, yes, the county is and the city are going through they're going through a lot of planning and thinking about infrastructure and also about how to interrupt poverty and improve quality of life and also re-energize, economic opportunity for folks. And we shouldn't be, again, in a vacuum or somehow siloed. I was talking with Andy Brewer a number of years ago, and I loved his thinking on this, and I repeat it often. We need to think about ourselves not as a donut any longer in our community, but as a Danish. That's right.
Andy,
right?
Andy's a good guy.
And I think it's so true. And I love pastries, but I also love the idea of interdependence, which speaks, I think, to the wonderful Rachel Carson quote too that you had, Dr. Murphy. I mean, I think we also came in as newer counselors and in conversations with Doug and with Karen and Ed Theobald and everybody who's been here, came in and said, and with Sarah, who's been here too, of course, we are not going to try and force the villages to align exactly with whatever we're talking about, because we are going to be working together. And the villages have comprehensive plans. Manoa has this incredible partnership with the ESN school district to look at sort of their wastewater and management, their sewer system. That's really remarkable. And I don't think people know about that. Thank you very much, Dr. Murphy. Exactly. We have some opportunities where we can learn from each other. And also we've had lots of conversations about how we could start to think about the villages and the town not as separate jurisdictions, but rather the villages being cultural and commercial centers and historical centers for the town. And that, I think, lends a real opportunity to think about the literal connectedness and the way we transport ourselves in healthier manners and safer manners too. I was riding yesterday on the Erie Canal next to a young man who had an electric bike, like a power assist bike, and was thinking how he would probably prefer to get, from here to there, right along the side of the road. It's really not appropriate to ride in the center of the road is safe. And he probably doesn't feel as safe doing that, going from even Fayetteville to Manlius. We've got the connection, again, speaking to the fact that we don't want to do things in a vacuum. We've got Elevating Erie and the state efforts to connect the Erie Canal trails, but also a safe pedestrian walkway and cycling way across the state, and maybe north and south in some cases. So we also have drones that are going to be delivering packages. We have electric cars and driverless vehicles that are coming, so our curbs need to look different. We cannot endeavor to build a plan that is thinking that when you reach the town border, you know, everything stops. We must be working together. And then how does that actually work? Luckily for us, we have some interdependence already. We have intermunicipal agreements that already exist. We have members of governing bodies who are on planning boards and sit on different boards already. The mayors and trustees are active and in great communication with the board. So I anticipate that the Comprehensive Planning Committee will, the Executive Committee, the Steering Committee, I think that's what we're endeavoring to call it, would comprise membership from all of those important areas. And then Casey has a question here. It's perhaps for Neil. As the West has studied how to better protect human communities from wildfires, they have begun consulting more seriously with Indigenous communities which practiced controlled burning. Your comments about sustainability and protecting natural resources for future generations sounded very much like the language of the Haudenosaunee people and their moral commitment to make decisions with consideration to the 7th generation. Do you recommend we seek conversations with Native peoples as we pursue the comprehensive planning process?
I think if it's not making contact, I think looking at some references, for example, that I think the philosophy of the peacekeeper is an extraordinary philosophy. And I think we can all learn and relearn by reading some of that. But I'm sure that it would be fairly easy to get somebody from the Onondagas to be present for one or more of your meetings and talk about their philosophy on, you know, they may not use the word sustainability, but they may be interaction with nature or whatever they would describe it. I think that's a good idea.
We thank you so much for that. We want to go beyond compliance for the Climate Smart Communities actions. We want to be recognized and certified as a Climate Smart community for New York State, which offers lots of incentives in terms of grant support, if it still exists, hopefully. And it doesn't go far enough in some cases to achieve the kinds of goals we're talking about here and the kind of vision that we could discuss and build in the community. But the Sustainability Committee, which is a part of the town of Manlius now, it's led by Councilors Creasel and Denton. The goal there is, I believe, and Sarah and Doug, I think you might, and John might know more about this too, the project goals for the high impact action items that we need to achieve to be certified are already sort of on the docket. And so we already have a built-in systemic way to start taking action. And the way we've talked about how the Sustainability Committee and the Comprehensive Plan Committee work together are that they are about maybe the larger philosophy and these goals like you've described in Flagstaff and Avondale, and then the work of meeting the goals in a on an annual basis or in a very project-oriented manner would be maybe the Sustainability Committee. It's just to orient people to what we've been talking about so far.
I think the other thing, Heather, too, right? I mean, when we talked about, possibly going across the village boundaries, I think, some of the things, and Neil just jump in, that Neil and I've seen in other communities is, getting that grassroots involvement with a community vision. It sounds corny, but one of the things I wrote down here, with a mission statement, That starts to drive home. And, when you talk about sustainability, you get the grassroots, you get, the doctor, the baker, the bridge maker, you get a good cross section of your community. And the inertia that you start to move forward with kind of pushes the vision across political boundaries. The other thing, we talk about it in communities we work with the demographics such as Manlius, and specific to Manlius, having been here since 1966, the people of the community have an appreciation for the community, for their vision, and it's not always about the cost, right? So, when we talk about, what's out there for funding, I mean, to a certain extent, what I've always seen with the constituents of Manlius is if you're doing the right thing and it's visionary for where they want to be, and it makes you proud to be part of that community, and the things that you're doing, whether it's sustainability or specific community type aspects, people value that from an economic standpoint, and to a certain extent, they will step up to the plate with that vision, because I think that's where the constituents are.
I think that's fair.
Right.
I think that's
I
really
mean,
fair.
that's kind of what I've seen with things that we've done in the past, right? I mean,
Totally
Absolutely.
agree, Doug.
don't you? I mean, Neil has family in the community here, and I think that's the way we all would look at it, right? As all peers who live in this community.
Yeah.
Thank you for that. And since this is a listening session, we were listening, of course, to our experts and getting some great questions. I have the ability that I thank you very much to Allison Weber for making me a host on the Zoom. I can click and allow anyone who's joined the meeting to speak. And frankly, it'd be wonderful to hear your voices. So apologies for reading out your questions earlier when you could have asked them yourself live if I had empowered you to do so through the Zoom. Do you mind, in the last 10 minutes that we have together, could I ask you to share some feedback, ideas, or anything you'd like to say about our natural environment? Here's a suggestion. What do you tell people about our natural environment when they come to visit, or when you're trying to recruit someone to come and live here? And if you raise your hand, so to speak, I can allow you. Oh, there we go. Don Gates raised his hand. I can allow you to speak. Great. Let's see if I can do this, Don. There we go. You're all set. And I'm asking you to unmute. There you are. Thanks.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Oh, now I lost you guys. Wait, but you can hear me, right? I can't see you guys anymore, but
We can hear you, Don.
Yeah.
now, okay, good. You can. So I think, Allison, your question was, what do I tell people about Manlius?
Sure. Anything you want to share. That was just an idea.
I grew up in Camillus, and we never, I didn't know much about Manlius. And I sort of stumbled upon living here later in life. And the reason I moved here is because of what the engineer said. I'm blanking on his name right now. The Three Falls Woods area. I knew about that from an environmental group I'm part of. And what Manlius has, and what I'm encouraged by the comprehensive plan, is that you're recognizing resources that other communities have lost to development. And so that area, and I think preservation of woodland areas or open parks are very important to a sustainability plan, not only from, let's say, an environmental and economic, but also just for everybody's well-being. I think they find people are healthier when they live near forests or near parks, open spaces. But the last thing I'll mention is just I've also seen a degradation in a stream near me. I don't think many people realize that stream. And as it was mentioned with the climate change we're witnessing here with the more rapid or less water, but more intense storms, I was just down looking at this little feeder brook to limestone that goes through Glencliff, and it's drying up right now, but there's a population of trout in there that are trapped. So it's an intriguing problem for me to watch as a neighbor, and to also watch the influences that are impacting these trout, because I think the way the trout go is the way our community go, because they're an indicator of climate change in the cold water. So it's but I think we have so many amazing resources here, and I'm so encouraged that we were lucky enough to have everybody here to talk about how do we go forward and preserve it for future generations.
Thank you so much, Don. Steve, we've got you. We've got your hand here. You're on. Thank you.
I think I'm unmuted. No, and I would, I guess what I tell people about the town and the area, and I live in the village of Manlius in the old section, is pretty similar to what Don said. I mean, and the watershed is particularly important to the quality of life for me here, and not just the feeder, the visible feeder streams and brooks that feed into limestone and the lake, but the springs that are underground and some of the buried creeks in the area that we've culvertized and run under the roads as well. And those are part of that connected watershed, as I'm sure Doug's aware, and you can't mention everything. But I do think the natural environment around here is of prime importance to the high quality of life. And it's good to hear that emphasized in this first listening session. The sustainability aspects that Neil talked about. My former boss, hi Neil.
Good to talk to you.
good news. It's good to see those highlighted. We do have some issues with the intense rainfall and stormwater runoff that I would hope a comprehensive plan can help to address, and as well as the severe dry conditions right now, which are impacting a lot of habitat both in and out of the water. So appreciate this conversation quite a bit. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Steve. We have next Casey. And then I believe Nancy Smith has a question, and then Sarah Gridley. So Casey?
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hello, thank you so much for this wonderful program today, all of you who presented and all of you who organized. When I talk about where I live, I'm so excited. I live in the Brookside neighborhood, which borders Green Lakes. So within a few minutes, I can be in an old growth forest, or at another point in my neighborhood, I can climb a hill and be in the bird sanctuary of the grasslands. We feel unbelievably fortunate to live in such a fantastic neighborhood. And I don't know that everyone knows how wonderful it is. But one of the things that's really affecting us on this side of the village is the pressure for overdevelopment on some of our remaining pieces of land in the village. But we're also getting a lot of pressure from traffic east of us, and the fact that it affects our natural environment in a lot of ways. I've had a lot of people tell me about concerns with the trucks, the noise, the air pollution that they create as we're having increased traffic from the thruway. The people in our historic district are feeling beleaguered and that their homes are not going to be protected unless we do something about trying to move some of that traffic outside of the villages. I don't know where that comes in the comprehensive planning process, but I just know that there's a lot of deep concern about that, and people from all sides of East Genesee are really worried.
Thank you for that.
That's a great point, Casey. And the Route 5 and the Route 92 corridors were a couple of things that I know are germane to this topic. But Neil, go ahead. You
Sure. I think this is a problem for many of our communities. I know, for example, the village of Skaneateles and the town of Skaneateles is very concerned about these large waste transfer vans that, just to avoid paying tolls on the New York State Thruway, they cut diagonally from Seneca Meadows through Skaneateles and then connect back up to 81 down south of us. So I think this is an issue that multiple communities, I think, could bring to bear to try and get better control over some of these unnecessary flows of traffic.
Thank you. Yes, we should definitely could have a whole traffic kind of conversation, couldn't we? but there are also options that have been discussed over the years, and this is where the history and having people that have been around for different eras is really very useful, because I remember talking with Doug about sort of the mitigation of the Route 5 traffic and some other road options that have been discussed over the years, and what it would really take to get there. Frankly, if we're having big conversations about 81 interchange and sort of the community grid in the city, if the state is paying attention, having conversations with folks about traffic, you know, we want to be prepared to jump in and offer our thoughts about that flow. So what we've got, thank you so much. We've got, next would be Nancy Smith, who's listed under here, Sarah McNamara. I'm going to, Sarah, you should be, let me just see.
Okay, so it's Nancy.
All set. I'm sorry, Nancy.
Anyone that can help me with this technology glitch, let me know. Anyway, two comments. One is I think there's an immediate market. This is an absolutely gorgeous community. If we continue to have sprawl, that's a problem. I just think there are more creative ways to inbuild or to, you know, build over existing properties perhaps that, you know, need to be replaced. The market opportunities, people like me. I came here 18 years ago because I needed a house big enough for my family, and now I need to get out of here and downsize. And there just is not housing stock anywhere really to meet the demand of boomers, aging boomers like myself that want to stay out here where it is absolutely gorgeous. But I don't know if I'm going to have that, you know, as a viable option anytime soon. And I'm talking about affordable housing, not the high-end stuff over in Fayetteville. And the other comment I want to make, and I'm going to be brutally honest here, I think it's so important to use this planning process as the opportunity to engage residents across the town. As Sarah Ballinger knows, I'm very active in the community, but I'm active in the Syracuse community. This is the first opportunity I've had to be involved in something, or the first one that I've known to be involved in. I tried to get involved in voting in the village only to find out that I'm right outside the village, so I can't vote. So please use this as a vehicle for getting people engaged in civic activity.
Thank you so much. I'm sort of very conscious of the fact that we are, to my general knowledge, probably white folks of certain ages. And honestly, I know we're committed as a community also to think about engaging intergenerationally and making sure that folks of all sort of era of or tenure of living here also are represented in the process, because I get a sense that some people have opinions, but if they don't know about sort of what we've done with the Ledyard Canal over the years, are a little more apprehensive to sort of ask questions or share their views. So we want to make sure that people feel welcome to engage. Let's see here, even students too, particularly our, you know, younger folks in the community. And I think Sarah Gridley was going to speak too. May I unmute you here, Sarah? Oh, it says I can promote you to a panelist to allow you to talk. Here we go. If you're having any trouble, Sarah, let's see. You should be ready to roll.
Now, can you hear me?
We can. Hi, great. Hi, and we get to see your video too. I promoted you as a panelist based on your Zoom program.
Thank you. I have the unique experience of living in this community. I believe I'm 5th generation and 5th generation on the same property. So in terms of natural resources, it's been very interesting to watch what's happened in my lifetime and looking back at the historical record that we've maintained just on the geography and land use on the eastern side of the town of Manlius. So one of the reasons I chose to return here after a very brief stint in Madison County, which is lovely, was access to those natural resources and to some of the benefits that our community offers, being so adjacent to the city of Syracuse, as well as our excellent school system. I wanted to echo some of Casey's comments about traffic and real estate development, particularly on the eastern side of town, where there does seem to be more opportunity for that, but doing that in a very planned and focused way for the future. I did want to bring up one piece that I hadn't heard anyone speak about yet in terms of development and planning is brownfields that we have in our community. And I believe it may fall within the village of Fayetteville in particular, but I'm not 100% sure about that. And maybe
Yes,
Mr. Miller.
it's in the village, but we still can talk about Brownfield.
Okay. I don't know if Mr. Miller or Dr. Murphy could speak to the impact of those brownfields and how development might work with those. Help us understand it a little bit.
Actually, having some good property that is a brownfield can be a very strong asset to a community because of the in New York State, the brownfield grants that are available that can actually help in the development of a distressed property into a valuable asset. So I think I would recommend, Doug, maybe getting a list of those brownfield sites and maybe even talking to people with New York State, particularly New York State DEC and some others about what could be done in terms of getting maybe a grant that would look holistically at those brownfield sites.
Yeah, and Sarah, in a past life, Dr. Murphy and I have been involved in many situations with public-private partnerships, across the whole country. So, I think to have an open mind and view on, instead of the glass being half empty, the glass is half full. I think that's one of the key components to assist people with environmentally stressed properties to take a negative and turn it into a positive, right?
Thank you very much.
If you look at the worst site that we've had in central New York, I think it has to have been Onondaga Lake. And you look at Onondaga Lake today, I had the privilege to go swimming in Onondaga Lake. I think the first is part of the first group in 2015, August of 2015. And I just have to tell you, when in 1970, I came to work for O'Brien and Gear, and my first job was to take samples as part of a sampling crew on Onondaga Lake. And then with the appropriate resources, the commitment of the community, you can basically overcome almost everything.
That's a pretty good comment to wrap up with, I think.
Yes, very
Does anybody
helpful.
else need to say something before we do?
Anyone else have anything? I just wanted to thank you all for coming, and to the people who are listening to the recorded sessions, thank you for listening as well. We are really excited about engaging with everyone in this process. Let it be a joy, let it be fulfilling. We will be, just as a quick recap, we're going to be having our session with Barbara Rivette, and it's an Antiques Roadshow style presentation in October. I think it's is it the 18th, Sarah? Forgive me for not having the date right.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
The third Sunday.
Yep, the third Sunday. And so we're going to have the librarians bring an object from each of the areas, Fayetteville, Manlius, and Minoa, Fremont, Kirkville. And Barbara doesn't want to know what they are. So she's just going to be able to weave her magic and speak sort of spontaneously about these objects related to the history of our community. So that's very exciting. And I was really, Sarah, I didn't know that you were the 5th generation of the Gridleys, and that is very cool. And I'm hoping to learn a lot more about your family's farming experiences through the course of you being involved in the committee. And after our October presentation, we will have our commerce presentation in November. It will also kind of dovetail with Small Business Saturday. And one of the reasons we wanted to start out with our environment section is that the 20th through the 28th, I believe, is Climate Week for the UN, and a time when we sort of look at climate. So please join us for those. And then in December, we will have a sort of an all-call committee meeting. We'll also review then what the timings for gatherings look like in meetings. We can do a poll of folks too, but for now we'll stick with these Sundays. Finally, we will be sending to the committee a welcome packet with some maps and information so that you can look at some of the things that we reviewed in the GIS. And we will also be sending you some information about the call for applicants for support for comprehensive planning and development for the town. So that'll be coming to your inboxes very soon. And for anybody in the public that joined us, not on the committee, thank you. You're welcome to join us at any stage of this and be a part of the committee. And you can reach us by going to townofmanlius.org. Thank you so very much to our speakers, to Doug Miller, our town engineer, to Dr. Neil Murphy, who led both O'Brien and Gear and also SUNY ASF so well. And thank you, Councilor Bollinger, for all you've done to make these things possible. When I'm running around frantically trying to do 50,000 things, Sarah is the calm in the storm.
Well, thank you very much. And thanks to everybody for participating. Thanks to Allison for being our techie. And have a great day, everybody.
Enjoy. Thanks for letting us go over a few minutes. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.